Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Marias Pass route, where today we are driving a trio of General Electric ES44DCs in BNSF colours. We've got a fourth engine on the back acting as a helper. Yes, this is a Steam Workshop scenario called Train 245 Log Train Westbound, and I'll leave a link to it in the description if you want to try it out for yourself. As for what DLC is required, I'm pretty sure it is just the Marias Pass route itself. What does this say? Train detection system installed in track. All track work next 30 meters must comply with procedure. Oh, I think that's what Danny Harmon would call a defect detector, but I'm probably wrong there. And I also remember that the other day I downloaded a sound pack from Searchlight Simulations because, well, it was mainly based on the recommendation of, I think, someone who left a comment on one of my previous videos, I think. Might have been the one I did about Union Pacific engines. Anyway, yeah, I can already tell that just from the horn alone that it makes a big difference to driving this locomotive. Let's hear it again. And it's one of those annoying cases where the bell is also triggered when you blast the horn, and I don't like that. But anyway, just okay, so the signal's cleared. We can go. It's very quiet in here. And it's very laggy and all. Oh well, never mind. Let's get moving. I can barely hear the bell. Right. This should be interesting because I don't know for certain, but I would assume that this Searchlight pack has also altered the physics. It's either that, or we're just having to deal with or just the sheer weight of I think it's 50 log wagons. As for where we're starting from, I believe it's a place called Blackfoot. And let's check to make sure I'm not showing boggies. It is indeed Blackfoot. Though it's not Blackfoot, Idaho, I imagine. Well, obviously not Idaho because I think we're in Montana. And yeah, from memory, for me at least, the most notable part of this route is going through Essex, Montana, because that not only do you get to see the tiny little Amtrak station, but also the very strange and like low poly 2D rendition of the Great Northern F45 number 441, even though historically that engine never actually worked on the Great Northern. I think it was an ex-Santa Fe engine. This lot will take a very long time to clear that 60 mile an hour speed board. These certainly aren't what New Zealand's log wagons look like. Ours don't have these big, for want of a better term, backing plate at each end. But they do have these. I think they call them stakes. And yeah, I do apologise if you're having trouble hearing me. It's just that these locomotives are generally quite loud, especially when you've got three of them chugging away. I just saw that thing on the HUD, which was, well, on a British engine that would be the thing for the AWS alarm. But in the US, I think it would be an alerter. It's like a driver. It's like the American equivalent of a driver vigilance device. Strange. It seemed like the audio in the cab suddenly went a lot quieter when we put the engines back to idle. Must admit, I'm not really one for driving these sorts of long and heavy freight trains. Much prefer passenger services. And actually, come to think of it, the main reason why I ever went and got Marias Pass after it was made available again is because I figured, well, because there's a lot, and I do mean a lot, of other Steam Workshop scenarios on routes like Pacific Surfliner and Aurora to Chicago, where they do require Marias Pass. I think when I've done Pacific Surfliner scenarios in the past, I've just used the default Kuju era BNSF engines, which, suffice to say, don't look anywhere near as good as this. Even though I believe this Marias Pass is actually quite an old route. I think it was released in 2013 or something. Either way, it's in some ways it kind of reminds me of Sherman Hill, although obviously that area between Cheyenne and Laramie is nowhere near as hilly as part of Montana. Of course, whilst the terrain may seem fairly normal now, it'll certainly, or later on, I think we'll be going far enough to get into some of the more mountainous terrain. But yeah, I think we are following behind another train, but can't really tell how far in front they are. Although I think, although at the very least, it does look like we'll be able to get, at the very least, yellows for most, if not all, of our journey. I think in the past you see Dovetail, you can have alerters with a noise, so why don't you make that update for your Metrolink F59, or Coaster F59 for that matter? Lazy buggers. Yes, I'm pretty sure from memory, I think by default the alerter on this BNSF GEVO was also silent. It's a crossing. Even though there's no one waiting. Yes, I think another thing I remember is that a few times in the past where I've driven on this route, so I think I've got an engine with the same number as one of KiwiRail's DFBs. Although in this case, none of the four engines on this train, and that goes for this one as well, have DFB numbers. The closest I think we can get is probably this one of 7211, which is quite close to DFB 7213. Actually, I think in New Zealand, there are a few cases where we get freight trains as long as this one, especially on the Midland line, with the coal trains coming over to Christchurch from the west coast. Because generally, in those instances, you have, I think, normally 3 DX locomotives on the points, but then when you get to Aotearoa, they then have to attach another 2 or 3 helpers, because the tunnel between Aotearoa and Arthur's Pass is about 8.5 kilometres long, so it's one of the longest railway tunnels in the country, and it is on a brutal 1 in 33 gradient. And for reference, 2% is 1 in 50. I don't know what 1 in 33 equals in ratios. Though it'll be somewhere between 2 and 4%, because I know that 4% is 1 in 25. I don't think there's any lines in New Zealand that are as steep as that, at least not on the KiwiRail network. Because I think other than the Aotearoa tunnel, the steepest ruling grade that I can think of is probably the Westmere Bank at 1 in 35. And at the moment we're going along a 1 in 100 gradient, which I can see is, I think it's certainly hindering the engines in their ability to gain speed. But I think 46 miles an hour is not too bad for American freighters. And I remember, like, in my early days of Train Simulator, when I think the only American route I had was Donna Pass, and saw that a lot of the speed limits on that route were as low as like 25 miles an hour. and I thought that was the norm for American freight trains. Obviously, I've been proven dead wrong since then. And if I'm not mistaken, this version of the BNSF livery that these GEVOs are in, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's I think they call it H3 or H4. Also, I've never just noticed there's this old embankment that's curving away to somewhere I don't know. So that obviously that is remains of a disused line. Although I suppose, well, there's no track there, so all that's left is just the old formation. I actually kind of like this view where there's these three hard-working GEVOs that are currently on a relatively flat section, and then they're about to head into the mountains. I think these are just called if I'm not mistaken, these are just called the Rocky Mountains. I think they kind of straddle this part of the border between the US and Canada. Because if I'm not mistaken, Montana is, or the state of Montana is I think right there on the border with Canada. These levers for these blue housings for the throttle or the reverser and dynamic brakes, to me they look exactly the same as what you see on Kiwi Rail's DX locomotives. What is that? Lead axle sand. I'm not joking when I say this. From a distance I thought that said Long Island Railroad. Imagine that. You're at a station like you're at Jamaica waiting for your train to out towards Oyster Bay, and then all of a sudden this great big lumbering GEVO comes along with God knows how many auto racks. Although saying that, I don't think BNSF engines go anywhere near New York, at least not on a regular basis. This will make for a decent screenshot, methinks. You are on time, but I'm not adhering to any timetable, you knobby. Those look like grain hoppers. That's on the train. Actually, I've just realised, this sort of train that we're hauling now, isn't that what's called a unit train, where it's just a relatively long train where all the wagons carry the same commodity, or it's like a bulk load train or something like that. Hello, there's a DPU, or distributed power unit. We haven't got one of those on our train. Yeah, DPUs. If you don't know what they are, it's when they have much longer trains than you would, well, very very long trains, and they need to marshal a locomotive or two midway along the train, and these are wired up so that these things can still be controlled by the driver in the lead cab, and essentially all they do is help. I think they help to ease the strain on the couplers, because you can imagine, like, if you had a train of say 100 wagons, there's another DPU. Imagine if you had like a rake of 100 wagons with, I don't know, 5 engines on the front, so like we could say 5 General Electric U50s. If anyone knows what the U50 are, more power to you. Or rather, if anyone knows of the U50, more power to you. Yeah, you'll see that if you try moving a train that long, regardless of the number of engines on the front, you could potentially break some of the couplers. The speed limit's 50 miles an hour along here. Just easing back on the throttle. What's this place? Well, actually, I think the label earlier said it was Browning. I forgot to mention at the start that that when we were at Blackfoot, we had 18 miles to go before we get to the end of the scenario at a place called Grizzly. So, obviously, I'm guessing the Empire Builder would stop at the station. One thing's for sure is that we're not. But hello, there's a little SW1500. That's something else worth mentioning, is that this Marias Pass route includes the General Electric ES44DC and the EMD SW1500. Though I can't really understand why they put the SW1500 is in like ex-Burlington Northern colours. Although, come to think of it, have any SW1500s in real life ever actually carried like a full BNSF livery? Because I thought it would just be a case of keeping the old Burlington Northern Cascade green, but instead just patching over the BN logos with BNSF. Because obviously, as a lot of people would know, I believe it was in 1995 when the Burlington Northern Railroad merged with the Atchison, Topeka and Santa Fe in order to create the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway. And this is something I don't recall ever seeing on a US route before. I think this is a windbreak. Whatever it is, or whatever you call it, it does look like something put in to control, or to control the wind. Because yeah, to me, this looks like the sort of area that would get very, very windy. And it was like there was a similar situation to this on the Rimotaka incline here in New Zealand. And if you don't know what that is, it was about 3.5 miles of a line that had an incline of 1 in 15, which is somewhere between. It's basically 7%. Which is nothing for the narrow gauge lines in Switzerland, but in New Zealand it is a terrifying beast in terms of how difficult it is to get a train up that incline. And it had what was called a fell centre rail, which was a sort of adhesion assistant in a way, like a rack and pinion system, whereby there was a raised centre rail. And there was a group of 6 specialist tank engines called the H class that had these really weird horizontal driving wheels inside the frames, and they gripped the centre rail, and that was how they got up the incline. And there was one particular section of the line, I think it was called Siberia Curve, where in the 1870s, or sometime between 1878 and 1900, there was a rather nasty incident where a train was going up. I think it might have been going down the incline and derailed, or it was actually going around this curve, and the wind was so strong that it just blew some of the coaches right off the track, and they went and careened down the hillside. And it's not a good way to go. Suffice to say, the engine stayed on the track, from what I gather. And yeah, they put up NZR, or New Zealand Railways, put up a windbreak in order to obviously prevent incidents like that ever happening again. And as for where the Rimotaka incline is, or was, it was in the very difficult Rimotaka ranges between the Hutt Valley, which is near the capital city of Wellington, and the Wairarapa. And in 1955, New Zealand Railways opened up an entirely new alignment, which was nowhere near. It was a lot faster and flat and a lot more level than the old route through Kaitoke, Summit and Cross Creek. And since then, that 50s alignment has been in use ever since. And KiwiRail still uses it today for passenger and freight services between Wellington and Masterton. As for the rather strange H-class FEL engines, there were only 6 were built, and 5 of them were scrapped in 1956, but one of them is preserved, and that is H199. And if you're ever in the Wairarapa, you ought to go to the FEL Locomotive Museum in Featherston. Excuse me, I just needed to clear my throat and have a drink. Not booze, mind, I only drink water and fruit juice. That's better. These blasted cicadas again. I don't know if you can hear it, but outside my house, it seems like every day now I've been getting well, in summer at least, I've been getting these blasted cicadas out there in the trees, I think, and I think it's when they sort of brush their wings together very quickly, you get that strange buzzing noise. Either way, it is a bit annoying, but more often than not, I don't notice it, surprisingly. Right, see how many miles we've got to go. That's actually, we've got a lot less distance to cover than I thought. Only got just over 7.25 miles. Some of the place name, I've noticed that some of the place names along this route are quite fascinating. Like, I think at the, yeah, hold on, I'll just check. Because I'm pretty sure at the western end it's Whitefish. Can't be Falls. Works just, that alert, it works just as it should in real life. That's the branch line. So yeah, you've got Whitefish at the western end, which is already a funny name, at least in my opinion. And then at the eastern end you've got Shelby. And that looks like a balloon loop, kind of like what you get at Woodville. And this route is well over 100 miles long. So it's, I think in my case at least, I don't think I'd be able to do it all in one sitting. But yeah, as I was saying, there's a few, well, from what I've seen so far, there's actually quite a few amusing or interesting place names along here. Like, you can see on the HUDs that our next waypoint is a place called Spotted Robe. And I would assume that's something relating to Native Americans, but don't quote me on that because I don't really know anything about the history of this country. Well, rail history is a different story, but even then, still a bit of a novice. Although, of course, I do know about the Transcontinental Railroad and other absolutely phenomenal success stories like Casey Jones's effort to try and avoid ramming into the other train. Or forget about that. I was trying to lead that joke into something about Penn Central, but obviously I've completely screwed it up. Actually, I think, yeah, I do apologise if I got that thing about Casey Jones wrong, because from what I gather, I think by the time he noticed this other train in front of him, it was, I'm pretty sure it was too late to stop the collision, and his engine rammed into the back of that caboose, and, well, just the back of that train as a whole, for the most part, no one was killed, unfortunately, and the only fatality was Casey Jones himself. But I mean, it's obviously very sad that for anyone to die, really. But in Jones's case, I think he, it's the sort of way I prefer to go. Is like whilst trying to save the lives of other people. In other words, Casey Jones basically sacrificed his life to save others, and that's the sort of thing I respect. Even more so if you still risk your life, but you make it out alive as well. No, I'm not keeping track. Yeah, I'm hilarious. Yeah, I'm not keeping track of exactly how often this alert is going off, but I think it's at least every minute. One thing's for sure is that I don't think I can turn it off. Okay, there's a yellow signal and another train. Let's blast the horn. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Yeah, well, I already know about stopping at Grizzly, mate. Yeah, what I was about to say was that that horn sequence I've just done, I'm pretty sure that is, yeah, that is prototypical, and it's a pretty common horn sequence in real life, where you do long blast, short blast, long blast. And I think that with that last long blast, you have to hold it down until you go through the crossing. Of course, there are some places where they've got, I think they call them quiet zones. Yeah, like on Metro's BNSF line between Aurora and Chicago over in Illinois. I was told about a year or so ago that most of that route is, or at least I think it's between like Route 59 and Aurora. I'm pretty sure it is only between like either Aurora and Eola Yard or Aurora and Route 59 station. That's the only part of that route, like right at the western end, where you can actually blast the horn. Because I think the rest of it, going into Chicago, is a quiet zone, and doesn't really surprise me because that area is pretty heavily developed, and there's a lot of people that live around there, as evidenced by the fact that sorry for that long pause, I was just having some water again. Yeah, that line in between, or that's Metro's commuter rail service between Aurora and Chicago Union Station is the busiest on the Metro network. I read somewhere that it had something like 37,000 passengers a day, which is just incredible to me. Mind you, I suppose the capacity of the trains is probably helped by the fact that they use double-decker gallery coaches. And yeah, from what I've seen in the timetable, the frequency of the service along the BNSF line is quite intense, especially for an American commuter line. Because I think from what I've seen, there are some cases in the US where there's a commuter rail service in a certain area, but it only runs at like peak times and like during the week. Like there's no midday or weekend service. Now this is curious because it looks like we're going over a summit. I mean, you can certainly see the gradient change when you zoom in. I'm actually just letting the train coast over the incline without any input from the driver. It took me a while to notice this. There is a no smoking label, which is always good to see in a locomotive cab. Because obviously there are places where I think, well, generally those no smoking signs are a very common sight these days. And yeah, the less I say about that topic, the better. Because I'd prefer not to say anything about it when I barely know anything. When I barely know anything about smoking. Now there's a moderately busy road over there. Yes, from what I've seen, this part of the US is quite sparsely populated, which is certainly a massive contrast to, as I was just describing earlier, places like Chicago, and I guess in particular New York City. I can see that now that we are approaching this waypoint at Grizzly, so I'm just going to check and see if the signal is red. So try to slow down to the point where I can safely stop before going through the signal, because that would never do. Yes, I don't think I'll do another run in Train Simulator today. I think this one, just that run I did earlier with the GG1 and this BNSF engine, I think that should be enough. At some point I think I'll probably do another gameplay video on a British route. since yesterday. I did those 2 videos about British engines, and by my standards they've done reasonably well, because normally my videos don't even get 100 views in the first day, but these 2 within the first 24 hours, but these 2 did. And as for these journeys on American routes, these are primarily for American viewers, because I know that I saw in the analytics once that a lot of the people who watch this channel are from the USA. And in response, I will use a quote from the late Barry Chuckle, and it was from an episode of Chuckle Vision, where he looked in the mirror and simply said "perfect," and went back and said to himself, "Thank you very much." And that's what I say to the people who watch these videos. But yes, I've realised that once we come to a stop on that marker, there won't be much time before the scenario ends. So yes, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to those who have watched this. I'd like to say a big thank you to those who have watched this video, and especially if you stuck around all the way to the end. And I hope you enjoyed this run with the BNSF ES44DCs, and I will see you next time. I'll leave a link to that Searchlight simulations pack in the description also if anyone's interested.